Well, hello, and welcome to another in the series of Café Insights. I'm Andrew Vine, the head of the Insight Bureau, and today I'm in conversation with Dr. Yuwa Hedrick-Wong. Welcome.
Thank you, Andrew.
Nice to see you back in Singapore again.
Thank you.
You spent many years here.
I did, indeed.
Yeah.
10 years.
Tell us, what keeps you busy at the moment?
Well, I'm still serving as the Global Economic Advisor at MasterCard Worldwide. I'm also teaching at UBC, University of British Columbia, Vancouver, Canada, mostly at the MBA program. And most recently, I've been busy setting up the MasterCard Center for Inclusive Growth, which is a dedicated think tank to advance knowledge leadership, all about how to understand globalization better to make sure that growth can become more inclusive.
And of course, you're also called upon to provide presentations to companies, to boards. You've just come to Singapore to speak at an event, which is how we work together. Tell us a little bit, perhaps, about what you think we have in store for 2014. A lot of people are talking about the recovery. Is it real? Is it sustainable? Well, maybe I'm kind of suggesting perhaps this is a question we have to chunk down into little bits.
Yes.
What do you think?
Yeah, I think the recovery really has to be re-examined more carefully. I think the drivers of growth in the global economy is morphing as we speak into very much, for lack of a better term, a multi-modality type of recovery. Different regions will move at different speeds, and within each region itself, different markets will be driven by different factors, different forces. Some are internal, like inclusive growth, that can generate stronger domestic demand that is synergized with domestic investment and so on, or continuous dependence on exporters in many other emerging markets. So we got to really understand a lot of the recovery in terms of regions, in terms of specific economic forces involved. It's going to be very complicated. The short answer is that the rising tide lifting all boats phenomenon of the past is now truly history.
So it's not going to be business as usual. It takes a new type of thinking about global economy.
Yes, indeed. And I think we're actually moving into, in some way, uncharted territory. Because as you may recall, for the last 20, 30 years, since that in our sort of active professional lives, it has always been a case where, you have to develop economies and pulling the emerging markets along, right, closing the gap, and so on and so forth. I think the global economy in the coming years will be completely different. Emerging markets actually will be playing a leading role in many instances. And so would the developed economies as well, but it's a mixed bag. Many developed economies will slow down and stagnate, while some emerging markets will continue to power ahead. Some of the winners of yesterday will become the losers tomorrow.
Well, this morning you were talking about conflicting forces. It's going to be a more complex set of factors that are going to drive the economy. Tell us a little bit more about those, and what are the inhibitors and what are the drivers?
Well, one of the more serious, I think, and very stiff headwinds for the global economy is the continuing festering of the Eurozone crisis. We're not going to see any short-term solution to the crisis in spite of a more stable situation in the last few years. And essentially, we're talking about a decade-long and perhaps more of stagnation in the Eurozone. So that in itself is a very, very stiff headwind holding back global economic growth. So from a regional point of view, you can single out the Eurozone as one of the biggest drag. The second is a very deep source of uncertainty today with respect to global economic outlook, and it's the timing of the normalization of interest rates. Interest rates need to be normalized. Zero or close to zero interest rates are not normal.
I was going to ask you what is normal, because 0% surely is not.
No, and a positive real interest rate means that the time value of money is positive, which in turn means that there is productivity, there is genuine growth, and investment is generating a positive return. That is not normality, and we've got to return to it. But the timing is critical.
And this is why the US is talking about tapering
QE,
yes, because they don't want to do anything too sudden that's going to cause a shock.
Correct, yes. So the whole notion is that ideally you want to do that only when the real economy is strong enough to withstand the unavoidable shock.
But the US economy is looking better. I mean, you're pointing to this as one of the positives and the drivers.
Indeed, it is private sector driven and private sector alone.
In spite of the government.
In spite of the government. And the government actually is very much a drag on the economy in the US. It's utterly, completely dysfunctional.
And then finally, of course, as you've intimated earlier, the role of the emerging markets. So everyone has been very excited about, in particular, China and India. Of course, we've been talking about BRICS, but I mean, as a grouping, that seems not to make as much sense as it used to seem one day.
No, Andrew, it never made sense.
Okay.
That's my view. It's never made sense.
Beyond China, there are many other dynamic markets that you are pointing to that look very healthy.
In fact, one of the most exciting and most dynamic regions, or sub-region, is right in front of our very eyes, and that is the coming together of the ASEAN Economic Community 2015.
Well, you wrote about this in the recent GEMS report that you wrote for the Insight Bureau.
Yes, I did.
It does speak very positively about the potential. How real is the potential, though? I mean, I think a lot of people are questioning whether the political will is going to be there by each member.
I think it's totally justified to ask how real is the 2015 timeline, and the potential is real. The only question is that to what extent 2015 is a realistic timeline for the realization of that potential. I have absolutely no doubt that there will be a lot of hiccups, a lot of 2 steps forward, 1 step back. But I do believe that at the end of the day, pragmatism will prevail in ASEAN, and they will make it happen. It may very well not be 2015 for the full implementation of the free trade agreement. For ASEAN, it could be 2017, could even be 2019, but bits and pieces will get done.
Well, we just had a very interesting lunch upstairs as the CEO informal lunch group, and it was kind of interesting that heads of region were not really thinking about an ASEAN strategy. They were just saying, well, we have a country strategy replicated within this region. Perhaps if this economic community develops, that will change, and people will actually have a different view on the region.
Yes, as it begins to take on a more concrete shape, I think that's what is required. At the moment, it's still very amorphous. It's amorphous because of the timing issue. And also, we don't know which bit of the agreement will get implemented first. And I think one of the senior CEO of a very large global company that we had lunch with today mentioned, well, if the standardization, of quality control, certification of expertise and so on, get done first in the ASEAN 10, boy, he can have an ASEAN strategy tomorrow, right? For him, the big bottleneck is a lot of the standardization of quality and skills and so on for his industry. So I think each industry will have its very specific concern.
And if this potential is fulfilled, I mean, a lot of businesses will welcome this as an additional driver of growth, but also a bit of diversification of some of their interests. A lot of organisations have felt they've had too many assets in the China basket, and they will relish the opportunity to diversify.
Especially, at least my expectation, is that China will be slowing down in the coming years. And so for businesses looking for greenfield expansion and so on, I think the ASEAN Economic Community actually represents a very exciting, new set of horizon, as it were, for them to examine more closely.
And speaking of China, then clearly what happens in China matters hugely to everyone's global strategies now. The government has just announced its latest plans. What are we likely to see from China then?
Well, first of all, there's no surprise in terms of the announcement itself, right? It can be boiled down to really two key themes. The first is, yes, greater involvement of the market forces being embraced with respect to economic development for China and so on. And second, however, is that state-owned enterprises, the government will continue to play a leading role. So the rhetoric is no surprise. I think the devil is going to be in the details. And first and foremost is that for China to really rebalance its economy, which that's a stated intention of the government. A minimum prerequisite is to really build up a credible set of institutions to implement the rule of law. Because rebalancing of the Chinese economy requires that indigenous domestic innovation take off. And that would not happen
in the public sector.
Yeah, if the public sector dominates, if the rule of law cannot be counted on to protect one's interest in the market economy.
So when we look, as international companies do at their global footprint, and more of it seems to matter in the emerging markets, how do you think, where are the winners and losers going to come from? I mean, who do you think what does it take for a successful international company to succeed now?
I think there's two prerequisites, and they would constitute what I see as necessary conditions, but not sufficient conditions. The first prerequisite is that they need to have really deep local knowledge. And that is a direct consequence of what I earlier referred to as a multi-speed, multi-modality type of global recovery. Without deep local knowledge, you wouldn't know where growth is coming from, because there's no more rising tide lifting our boat.
Yes.
The second, though, is that at the senior-most level, you need a leadership that can accommodate a global vision with deep local knowledge. The danger is that you have a leadership that will ignore local knowledge being too parochial, periphery. And then you end up with either a Eurocentric, American-centric, Japan-centric, or whatever-centric view that fail to grasp the importance of this new global economy, which is multi-speed, multi-modality global economy.
So, in all, you seem to be quite optimistic about the prospects for the world economy, and in particular the role that Asia is going to play.
Indeed, very much so.
Brilliant. Well, thank you very much for spending the time with me, Yuwa.
Thank you, Andrew.
Pleasure to see you here.
Good to see you again.
And thank you.